Okay, our next session is on immigration and recruitment. I have to say I received most questions and stories related to this topic from our researchers, many of whom can't be here today. So the British researchers are saying, will Europe still allow us and welcome us and understand that we want to still be involved with European research? Or there are fears out there about being rejected and refusals to collaborate. Our EU research staff have asking for more specific details on what the university will do to help EU staff to stay. Will there be specific case-by-case help? And for families who have one EU, one non-EU, all these different combinations of wonderful people that we have here at Oxford. And will there be support from lawyers to help people get settled status if that's what they choose? And then the very last question comes from non-European researchers. How is Brexit going to affect them, do we anticipate, when it comes to immigration recruitment? Are the tier 2 visas and regulations going to change? What I would say is I think a lot of staff aren't here, partly because they know the answer to a certain degree is we don't know and anything could happen, but they would very much welcome what we have currently in terms of information. So the next session has two speakers. The first is James Baker from our very own staff immigration team, who will update everyone on the stage 1 negotiations and what information we do now have that relates to the rights of EU staff who have these concerns about Brexit. And I'm sure more questions, as we already heard one, is going to come to be posed to him. And then I'll introduce Mike Galsworthy later.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what's happening on the immigration side of things, and unfortunately a lot of it is we don't know for certain. In my talk, I was going to start the talk about how vital the EU staff are, and I have a slide and some of the things the Vice-Chancellor has said previously. I think the previous speakers have done a far better job on that than I am, so I'm going to miss out that bit and talk more about the immigration side of things. So obviously EU staff and international staff are vital for our research, and I think we've had from all the previous speakers how important that is, so I don't want to talk any more about that. What I do want to talk about more then is what the current negotiations are saying. Now, on the 8th of December, the negotiations included a joint report on stage 1, and that handled the immigration area, which it seems that both sides are happy with, and they've understood what's going to happen. And some things have been decided, and I'll just run through some of what the things have been decided. The first one is any EU citizen and their families who arrive before the date the UK leaves will be able to stay in the UK, and once they have completed 5 years, they'll be able to apply for settled status. They've also quite clearly categorically said that any EU citizen who's currently here or is here at the date of withdrawal and has acquired that settled status can also stay as long as they want after. Now, I will say that one of the things that most Europeans probably aren't aware is if you have been here for 5 years as a worker or a student with health insurance, various other things, but if you have been here for 5 years, you already have the permanent status. So you don't have to apply for that. It's automatically given to you. What you apply for is a card that tells the Home Office that you've got it. So if you have been here 5 years as a worker, you have permanent resident status already. So that's, I think, something that is useful to know. So the period of residence must have been, at the moment, as an EU worker. So what they're saying is if you have been here for the last 5 years as either or at any time as a worker, self-employed, student, self-sufficient, or family member of such a person. Now, I was talking to the person who's writing the policy on this yesterday in London, and what they are saying really is if you are here legally, doesn't matter whether you are really classified as a worker, self-employed, whatever, you will be able to stay. The people they are trying to say can't stay who are Europeans are people who have criminal records or have been living for a large period of time as homelessness. Everyone else will be allowed to stay. So You've also been hearing, especially some of you were also students, that there was a requirement to have comprehensive health insurance. This new settled status that they are rolling out in the end of the year will not require any health insurance. I've actually was talking to them about how the application will work, and they are hoping that it's going to be what they call very, very simple. What they seem to be talking about is you will answer 5 or 6 questions on an electronic form. Hopefully, if you're a worker, they will automatically look at your tax records via talking to the HMRC database, and then they will see that you've been working 5 years and you've been paying tax, and they'll say fine. And then they will just check your criminal records status, and if that's fine, you'll get your card. They are not making this a complicated process. They're trying to make it as easy as possible for you, but also as easy as possible for them. They have also decided in the Part 1, the joint report, that family members, including spouses, civil partners, unmarried partners, dependent children and grandchildren, and also dependent parents and grandparents not living in the UK at the time of withdrawal will continue to be entitled to join EU citizens after the withdrawal, if the relationship existed at the time of withdrawal and continues to exist. Children also born or adopted after the withdrawal date will also be entitled to join the EU citizen parents in the UK. EU citizens and their families residing in the UK at the withdrawal date will remain entitled to healthcare, pensions and other state benefits. Those who have already obtained a permanent residence document will effectively be able to just send that permanent resident document in the post to the Home Office. They will then send back the new settled visa card. Though I hear that they're talking about this being an electronic card, electronic visa, and you won't actually physically have a card. You will just have a reference number which allows people who need to see it to access it. And importantly, with permanent resident status at the moment, you can lose that status if you're not in the UK for a period of 2 years. They are going to extend that to a 5-year period. Now, I will say currently, for international staff, that they have an indefinite leave to remain visa is a 2-year period, but that 2-year period you have to come back to settle to sort of re-establish that you're living in the UK again for the 2-year period. Always for the permanent residence, the European one, you could effectively fly in for the weekend and then fly back out again, and that would reset your 2 years. I think as they're now moving this to 5 years, I think they might not be as flexible about just coming in for a weekend to reset your 5 years. But that hasn't been written in yet. If you ever want to read that report, I believe these slides will be made available. There's a link there. Now, I've been talking about EU citizens. As well as EU citizens, we have those nationals from Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein, Switzerland. And at the moment, there is nothing certain about what their status is. However, the Home Office have published a report, what you need to know based on the joint report, and in this summary they stated that we also expect that our offer will be extended to residents of Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein and Switzerland, and I believe the Home Office has just started negotiations directly with those countries involved. So they're not expecting to be treating the EEA nationals and Swiss nationals differently. So what can the staff immigration team do to help European staff with this? Well, first of all, we have a mailing list. So anything changes or significant changes concerning Brexit, we will send out an email giving the detail of what those changes are. And quite a few European staff at Oxford and also HR people and anyone else is interested has signed up to that. And at the end of this, there's my email, and if you wish to join that mailing list, we're very happy to add you. And the other thing we have been doing is supporting EU staff with their resident card, permanent resident, and nationality applications. And I think I've spoken to in the last year, I've spoken and given advice to over 250 EU staff who are concerned and have been having issues or questions about this. And I'm hoping to continue to do that. And also we will support when the details of the new settled status visa is launched, which we think will be in late 2018. we cannot check every application word for word, but if there is ever a question that comes up that people say, what shall I put in this question? I'm not quite sure because X or Y. You can email us and we will help you. If we don't know the answer, we can talk to some immigration lawyers who will, and then I can provide the answer that they provided to me. And also, lastly, here is my contact details of one of my colleagues. So any of you or your staff or anyone who works who has questions about this, we basically want to help. So, we know that the EU staff are an invaluable part of the university. We are here to help you, and if you contact us, we will try and assist you in any way we can. So that's all I'm going to say about what is happening. Unfortunately, there is still an element of uncertainty. I think all the conversations I've had with Home Office officials has been, whatever happens, everyone who is here at the time of Brexit who is a European will be able to stay. That will not be a problem. Whichever side of the Brexit or Remain debate, everyone is on that page. No one wants, expects, or thinks that any European will have to leave who is here now. I also got from Ange a lot of questions. I can run through that, or I can probably open myself up to questions from the audience first. And if not, I'll spend a few minutes talking about what some questions some people have said or requested. Are there any questions?
I think we'll move to...
Okay, sorry.
And both of you together perhaps can answer some...
Okay, that's fine.
Right, so a very warm welcome to Dr. Mike Galsworthy, who is the co-founder of Scientists for the EU and Healthier in the EU. Previously, he was a researcher, just like us, working and has worked on science policy and health services research at UCL, the Royal College of Anaesthetists, and universities in Slovenia and Switzerland. Although we've asked him to speak on recruitment and immigration, Mike is perhaps better up to speed than most people I know on what's been happening with Brexit and EU science. So whilst he is going to speak on that topic, I hope he will be able to stay for the panel discussion at the end, and he might be able to put forward views on other questions you might have that span all of the themes that have occurred today. Thanks, Mike.
Yes, I'm more used to talking about the sort of the technical details of how UK and EU science works together and what the future programs are going to look like FP9. But the really important dimension here is the human dimension. So I'm glad to hear that you've got resources at the University of Oxford, and it's always nice to hear that the Home Office intends to make things simple and straightforward. However, what I'd like to take you through is the history of where we've come with the situation around EU citizens, and to a degree non-EU citizens as well, so that you can see some of the problems that we should be collectively preparing for, because that is important. Let me just do a quick thing and stop. Right. So, when the Brexit vote happened, what we did about a week after is we decided to do a monitoring of the science community, those following us on social media and then also sending emails around to see if there had been any impacts immediately from that Brexit vote. And we got about 430 responses there, in order to gather the anecdotal stories and actually map them out as hard cases, so that we could put to the government and also to the media examples of what are really happening. What we got from that, and you'll see here in blue, is concerns and worries and opinion, and in red is actual real changes happened already. In terms of the real changes happened already, there was disruption on Horizon 2020, projects being planned, not projects already underway, but projects being planned, and people having their roles sort of downsized on that, whether it be leadership role or whether it be them encouraged to leave. There was cases of job applications that were in train then being cancelled, jobs being turned down, as well as the Brexit vote encouraging a few people who had offers to work elsewhere, taking up those offers, some jobs freezing, some investment freezing, some relocation, and some budgets being hurt because of the instantly fallen pound. And so we tried to get these examples out to the media because squeaky wheel sort of gets the grease. But you will also see up there at the top of the graph that there was a lot of concerns over the general tone of xenophobia. There were some real examples given us about mistreatment outside the lab and university environments, and a lot of people declaring that they at some point intended to leave. I didn't know how seriously to take that because I've been intending to leave my bank, HSBC, for quite a while now, and I'm always angry about it. But sometimes this mood is something that is declared, and then when opportunities come, people are more likely to act upon it. So we had an eye out for all of those. In terms of, for example, student applications to universities, from 2016 to 2017, there was a dip associated with Brexit, a 7% dip. So if you were looking at the current growth rate, it was sort of 10% short of where it should be. That has recovered slightly this year by about 3.4%, but so that has been slowed down as well. And then in terms of stuff that is softer, which is harder to see, there's plenty of anecdotal cases of finding it harder to get in the top talent. And so there's Michael Arthur, Provost of UCL, saying that for one particular scheme where they would usually have about 30 EU applicants, they actually had 0 in 2017. And I've heard of many other incidents like that. Andre Geim, the Nobel Prize winner, was also saying with his Marie Curie grants that he hadn't had any applications to work with him also in 2017. And so you do hear lots of stories like that. But that is very hard to measure because there aren't a lot of statistics with it. Yes, there were some statistics reported in The Independent just last month saying there's a 90% increase in departures of European staff, but that has fluctuated a bit over the years, and there's also new ones coming in. So it's harder to grasp in terms of hard statistics, but there is certainly that being reported across many universities that given the uncertainty of the environment, it's been harder to attract particularly some of the top talent in. To look at another database where there is recording, you will see the pattern here closely sort of maps what Alistair was saying before, which is you don't have a sharp drop-off, but you certainly do have a limitation of growth. With NHS doctors, that continued to grow after the referendum debate, if you're breaking it down on a sort of like bi-monthly level, and it's starting to drop now. Nurses and health visitors in the NHS dropped off. Support to clinical staff continued to grow. But overall, with the patterns, it does seem to have attenuated somewhat staff hiring and staff attraction. A problem is that when the Brexit vote happened, there were lots of promises before that things would not change for EU citizens in the UK, but the government at that stage refused to provide that hard ring-fence guarantee, and rather there was all this issue of bargaining chips. For example, Liam Fox said EU nationals are one of our main cards in the Brexit negotiations. There's a book called In Limbo, which is a collection of over 100 stories of EU nationals in this country who've had problems with things like British citizenship and spending vast amounts of money on that because we do charge ridiculously compared to other countries, but also the permanent residence form, that 85-page form, which was quite torturous to a lot of EU citizens, fellow EU citizens, who didn't know whether to do it or not. Some did. There was a high rejection rate. You'd have to hand in your passport for months and also track your travel over the past 5 years. Here's an example. Mariana Mazzucato, she's quite a famous professor. She's advised the European Commission recently, and also the Labour Party on science and economics, saying that she had to start all over again for a minor error in one of these 85-page forms. So that had been going on for quite a while until we got to I would also say that things have not been helped by the Home Office by putting out, for example, the 100 deportation letters, including EU academics, even after the same incident had happened in December 2016 with this is Sam Schwarzkopf, and you say also told to leave because there was an incident even before that with another academic that they are being sent wrong letters and wrong information from the Home Office. And it is not as if no EU citizens are being deported, and so you can reject this out of hand, because in fact EU citizens are being deported, and it is on the rise, and this is very much under the radar. So when the Home Office says everyone will be fine, that isn't quite the case, because there are incidences of the Home Office really trying to identify people that it can deport. So, for example, they attempted a lot of that recently with rough sleepers, and I've talked to the charities who've worked with them, and they managed to fight back against this. There was one example, for example, of a baker in full employment, but rough sleeping, and when they found out that he was an EU national, held him in detention long enough for him to lose his work before saying, and you've got no work now, and tried to deport him. So there is problems with the Home Office that need robust capacity to challenge. In December, there was, as was just said, a phase 1 agreement that was an agreement in principle covering various areas. One of those was EU citizens in the UK and UK citizens elsewhere in the EU. The 3 million, which is a campaign representing EU citizens in the UK, were quite upset that instead of keeping with proposals by the European Commission before, that they would keep their EU citizen rights in perpetuity and have those rights unchallenged. Rather, they would move from that declarative state to actually having to apply for settled status. And I think it is probably true that those that have been in the UK for 5 years, where it's a clear case, then that should be a straightforward, simple process to transfer that across. However, there are questions of how that is going to be demonstrated for those that, for example, haven't been earning at a sufficient level, or have been in and out of employment, or have been there for less than 5 years, and or those who have been spouses and have kids here and have since divorced, or those reliant on the state now. So I think there is still a lot of clarity that needs to happen. So, but it has been phrased legally that inalienable rights that these EU citizens had before are now going to fall away, and they're actually going to have to apply if they fit criteria. And so what could go wrong with that? Now, I don't want to be alarmist about this, but let's walk through some of the scenarios where there could be problems. There is a problem around where there has been misinformation in forms before, because the Home Office have been quite difficult with previous application forms. Also, they do have a legal right to say that any misinformation that they see in forms could be classified as fraud. with data protection rules that the Home Office is trying to exempt itself from, they might not have to show you why they rejected a status. Also, in terms of what is covered as a criminal record, we have to be aware of minor offences here that we don't think are reasonable to classify as criminal records. Certainly there are cases in Switzerland where they tried to kick out anyone who had a criminal record, including minor offences. And so the problem becomes, what happens to those people? And remember, there are 3.5 million people that have to transfer from having guaranteed declared citizens' rights into applying for a new settled status. And if they don't qualify for that, then they will need access to legal challenge and review and so forth and so on. So if you have your application rejected, then you are sort of at that stage an illegal immigrant. Okay, don't worry about it too much. I am not here to scaremonger. However, for non-EU citizens, Theresa May has declared that for illegal immigrants, she has been creating a hostile environment so that if they don't believe that you are meant to be in the country, actions can be taken sort of under the radar, as it were, to hurt employment and to freeze bank accounts and accommodation and so forth and so on. And there is limited access to legal aid at the moment for those who are poor. And so what we're looking at here is what resources do we collectively have in order to ensure that, firstly, the Home Office gets this right, and secondly, if it doesn't get it right, we can actually help out these individuals. If you have 3.5 million people and a current Home Office error rate of 10%, according to the 3 million, that is a 350,000 people that could be subject to Home Office error. Hopefully with simpler forms that won't happen, but there's always going to be an error rate. Certainly with the permanent residence forms, there was a rejection rate of 29%, of which 40% of the appeals were successful. So you're looking at, again, around 300, 400,000 people if you're trying to drag and drop all of the EU citizens into a new system. That could have things go wrong on them with regard to Home Office mishandling. And so the Home Office is going to need a vastly increased bandwidth, not just to handle all of these people, but also to handle, for example, inquiries coming from universities, inquiries coming from businesses large and small, particularly, for example, small businesses that have been preferentially hiring EU citizens over citizens from elsewhere in the world because of that ease of hiring, and they will want to understand the new system. So the Home Office is going to be swamped. And the Home Office does have track records of kicking out academics on absolutely bizarre terms. This, for example, is Miwa Hirono, and she is a Japanese academic who specialized in international relations, particularly Chinese with the West. So she, as part of her job, was traveling a lot. Now, in 2014 or 2013, the Home Office decided to change laws about visas and said that if you spent X amount of time outside the country, you would no longer qualify for visa. She had this applied to her retrospectively for the years 2009 and 2010. And so the University of Nottingham contested this thoroughly, but then the Home Office decided that the Home Office was right and said, Miwa, go home. And she said, this is my home, and they said, no, go home. So there are incidences of where the Home Office has been particularly difficult with academics, and clearly this is damaging for our messages of being open for business and open to the rest of the world for the best and the brightest. The government and the Home Office say what is regarded as the right things, but in terms of their operation with regard to how they have treated academics in the past, but also, for example, just small things like including international students in the immigration figures, they are not actually making overt, concrete moves to change tone in terms of how they handle that. So, to move away from the horror stories and go onto the front foot and say, what do we actually need here? First, we need to start actually challenging the Home Office at the moment in terms of what their actions have been so far, how they prevent errors like this happening in the future, what is their capacity going to be? And I do think we need to put that challenge right out there, because we need it in the media to generate public awareness of problems that could be coming up, to ensure that cases of mistreatment don't go under the radar and don't get missed, and yet slowly within our community, globally, a reputation builds that we are negligent of those common academics and common EU and global citizens in our country. I think also we need robust capacity to give advice to and support EU citizens in this country, but also it will be, all international citizens in our country. We have got the 3 million who are working on the legal routes and campaigning for this. There is also Here to Stay, which is a new campaign about giving legal advice to any EU and EEA citizens that want it, and they've produced, for example, this fact book about what the situation is at the moment, and they are setting themselves up as a resource for that. They launched just this month. I think they should also be working with whatever capacity we can have at Universities UK and CBI and other business groups, so that there can be simple numbers for people to call to understand where the situation is at the moment. Because, as was said before, nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. This is a rolling dynamic, and so there does need to actually be numbers to call, and then there needs to be legal and support resource for those that do get caught in bizarre situations. Because we don't know how many people it will be, but obviously if you're taking that number of people and trying to drag and drop it into a new system, there are going to be cases where we are going to have to act fast. Otherwise, you will get more horror stories. And I think it's important to build up that kind of resource as well, because one of the things that I keep coming across is a lot of EU citizens in this country saying, everyone says you're going to be fine, you're going to be okay, it's going to be covered, but we don't know our rights yet. We do hear some of these stories in the press, and it doesn't look like people care. So we do have to get onto the front foot and build a very overt resource to show that we do care and we are championing them. And I think that is very, very important to demonstrate to those in our country, and also those that we want to attract to our country, that we have robust defense of their rights and their lives. And I think that's the most important message there. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike and James. Ready for some questions?
Thank you. My name is Ruth from the Department of Population Health. I have a question for the first speakers. I was very surprised to hear that, after having been here for 5 years, you get the permanent residency with or without application.
Yes, the way the rules work, that if you have been here as a qualified person, and that for most people in this room would be as a worker, for 5 years, you have gained permanent residence status. The permanent residence application you make is just for a card that shows and tells the Home Office that you have been here, because they don't record when you come in at the airport, etc., and that you have lived, though obviously they're probably collecting your taxes. So you have that status already. The permanent resident card just shows that. And if you wish to have British citizenship, the Home Office currently insists you have that card before you make the application. That you have that permanent resident status. If you make a permanent resident application and it's refused, that is not a visa refusal. It just means that you have not correctly demonstrated to the Home Office that you have had that status, and you can quite often read the why they have refused it and then just send another application fixing what they've said that you didn't do the first time round.
Thank you. I would have another question, if I may. The right, the settled status is like similar to the right of residency. Is this always linked to the employment? Because I wonder if there's anything university might set or try to help younger researchers or even senior researchers who work here without permanent positions. And I think there are quite a lot of researchers in Oxford, in my environment at least, without permanent positions. And there's always this fear about having a gap in between funding you can secure, because you might not always get the big funding, and the further you climb up in career, the more competitive it gets. So obviously there's this fear about what happens if you're without money for a period
I
of time.
The way that the Phase 1 agreement was written was based on being a qualified person. So yes, there is that, but the Home Office understand that if someone has been working for many years here, and then there was a period of unemployment for 2 months or 3 months or what have you, or that they've been, childcare for that period, they are taking the view that before, like, students needed health insurance. They have publicly said that is not the case. They've also said that there was a primary earning threshold, which indicated that if you were paid not very much, you wouldn't count as a worker. They've also publicly said that that does not apply for this new settled status. And they are talking, and they have indicated, but not said so publicly yet, that basically as long as you are here and have been here, doing living your life as you wish to, that settled status will be made available to you. So they've increased the flexibility of people who could not apply for permanent residence, for example, because they did not have health insurance, that the settled status will be much easier to get.
Jill first, and then we'll come to Christine.
Poacher gamekeeper. At the moment, when we have people coming from non-EU countries and they need visa, then the university goes through the process of getting that visa. If down the line, then, if you have to prove or disprove that you've been here for 5 years, surely what will happen is that the universities will have to, prove the right to work as we do now. So what do we think might happen then? It sounds like you're going to have to get a card if you want to get another job, because if you have to be able to prove your right to work, then that's the card that would do it, I guess. Is that what we think might happen?
From what I know, and this is early stages, the Home Office hopes that the settled status will not actually be a physical card, but it will be an electronic record which will give you a reference number, and then any employer who wants to see that you have this can use a Home Office system to get clarification that you have this settled status. Surprisingly, they have indicated to me that they're not thinking of rolling out a new special card, that it's more an electronic sort of thing floating in the cloud saying that you have this status.
But you will have to register, even though you have the right without registering. To change jobs, you have to register.
You would have to register because they think that in the future they'll have to be able to wait to determine the difference between a European who is here before Brexit or before the transition and a European who comes after.
This lady first.
Yeah, it's Christine again. I have more questions than is healthy for any of us at this point. So let's assume after having lived for a longer time in this country, having a family here, having paid taxes here, you cannot, by the way, imagine how upsetting this situation is for many of us. And you have to be extremely careful, in my opinion, as a university, to make sure that you unupset us somehow. Because I have worked at this university now since 1998. I've worked here longer than I've gone to school, kindergarten, and everything else put together. I think that's extremely important for the university to realize. It's extremely painful for all of us. This settled status that I'm supposed to apply for after this time, can that under any circumstances be taken away from me if I misbehave in a way that the Home Office sees as inappropriate?
Yeah, I wanted to take this one because the purpose of my talk and the way I did it was that I have learned over the last 1.5 years that just talking about the legalities of and what we hope to protect our fellow EU citizens in this country is not enough. There is a lot of real fear out there. There has been a lot of confusion and there has been mistreatment. And we do need to acknowledge this upfront. Like I said, I didn't want that to be scaremongering. I wanted it to be an acknowledgement of when lots of people have gotten scared and worried. And this is why we absolutely need resource going forward in order to be tackling all of these issues quickly. Now, I am very sure that most people, especially those people working in clear employment for a long time, will just get their number quickly and then it will be sorted. For the vast majority, it will be fine. But we care about other people as well. And we care about our fellow countrymen and women. And so this is why it is important in terms of the tone overall that we really go on the front foot and acknowledge that there have been lots of problems with the Home Office in the past. And as their bandwidth gets stretched, there will be more examples of this. So we need to champion very robustly as universities, also as workplaces and industries, but as society as a whole, we need that capacity in order to challenge problems quickly and be seen, very visibly seen, to be championing those that we really do genuinely, deeply value in our society, that have come here as friends and family and co-workers and contribute to our communities and charities, and say that these people don't live in isolation. They are woven into our society and we are here to champion them and protect them. I think that is important. I think that has been actually sorely missing from UK society so far, but does need to step up.
Can I?
If I could just add, I think it's important to say that this process, the Home Office is learning. I deal with the Home Office mostly on international immigration, and they're not the nicest organisation in the world, I don't doubt that. But they have been learning. The 85-page form is now an online system, that there is a passport return, so you don't have to send your passport. So they are listening to what people are saying, and they are amending their processes to make it easier and easier. And now they are even saying you don't have to send evidence because we can access it via talking to HMRC database ourselves. And they're talking about having to submit documents. You could just photograph your documents and send them online if you need to be. So they're trying very hard to make this as least difficult as they can.
I do actually wonder about the legality of this. I came into this country in 1993, and I had a status, and it was a legal status. And I have changed nothing at all. I do not understand why a country can change my status arbitrarily if it happens to want to do this. Why is my status changing, although I have done nothing? Are there presently legal challenges to this? Because I really don't understand how a country can do this. Change my status without me having done anything at all. Are you aware of legal challenges to this?
I'm not aware. I will say that...
Yes, there is.
But I will say that if you've been here 5 years and working for 5 years, you have that status of permanent residence, which gives that protection.
But I have to do new things. I have to apply for it, for instance. Which I have to have a visa, and it's called settled visa. I didn't have to have that before. I was a legal person in this country with the same rights as a UK citizen as far as I'm, apart from being able to vote, for instance, the Brexit referendum. But I don't understand what I have done to change my status.
Thank you. I think certainly I, the Research Staff Society, would like to hear more about your story in a separate, because we are here representing those academics who've been here for a very long time, have had their families here, have spent a lot of time here. We're also representing those researchers who would like to be here for 1 to 3 year postdoc contracts as well, and your feelings of frustration over the changes that are coming are crossing all research staff at the moment. Even the British ones would like to continue working with such an international group of academics. So the more you can tell us about your situation and the difficulties of whatever you're planning to do next, the better we will be able to help speak up for those researchers.
I'm not sure it's an answer. I'm no expert, but I
If
follow
you wouldn't mind taking the mic.
follow the news about this. There is a case going through the Dutch courts at the moment, which is about British citizens resident in the EU who are appealing on similar grounds, saying that their status cannot be changed on acquired rights, and that's to do with British citizens exercising treaty rights in other European countries. But it does have a potential implication here as well, in ways that haven't yet been understood. Other people will know much more about it, but it's Joe Morm is the QC who's taking that case through the Dutch, or was involved in the team. So it may be worth checking out him, because the third factor is that there are British citizens who are themselves being stripped of their EU citizenship through this same process. My pain can be nothing to those of who are in the situation you described, but I think there are these three elements which come together around this legal case, and it's well worth watching. So it's not necessarily the answer, but it may be a response to that.
And are you aware of the campaign, the 3 million? Are you in touch with them, following them? Okay, because they're lovely people, and if you want that kind of emotional support, they're there for you. Yeah, great.
As I said at the start of this session, I think it's the most emotive topic. It's the one where we've had the most questions and comments. I'm just looking at the time, though, and we are scheduled to go to lunch now. I know many more of you do have those questions. Either please ask them to the speakers directly over the lunch break, but I will be inviting both of these gentlemen back for the panel discussion at the very end of the day, where there's plenty more time to get into the nitty-gritty of these issues and really think about what strategies we can put forwards as a university together to support our staff who are experiencing this range of change that's occurring because of Brexit. So, a final round of applause for James and Mike. Thank you for being here.